Not too long ago, I did a video explaining the core reasons why Shark Tale didn't work as a parody of gangster movies, and you can find a link to it in the description in case you'd like to check it out first. But long story short, the reasons I presented mostly came down to the fact that sharks have to eat fish, so portraying them as gangsters and their prey as victims creates a lot of moral confusion on who exactly is in the right or wrong. And this, along with my original video on why most parodies don't work, which you can also find a link in the description to, got me to thinking if there were any animated parodies out there that actually were very good at being a satire of something that wasn't Megamind. And one movie that almost immediately came to mind was the 2000 stop-motion animated movie Chicken Run, especially when it comes down to everything right versus what Shark Tale had done wrong. And today, that's exactly what I would like to go over here. All the components that makes Chicken Run a great animated parody. And spoilers for this movie will abound, so in case you don't want anything ruined, you should probably click off this video and come back another day. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving you. Alright. So in case you didn't even know that Chicken Run was intended to be a parody, then let me just say, that right there tells you exactly what it did right. Because it's able to stand on its own merits and tell a great story, even divorced from the fact that it's meant to be a parody of something. But, surprisingly enough, it is. According to Peter Lord and Nick Park, the writers and directors of the movie, Chicken Run is meant to be a parody of POW, or Prisoners of War, movies, and specifically the 1963 classic, The Great Escape. And this is perhaps most evident in the aesthetic of the film. Specifically, Mr. and Mrs. Tweedy are the wardens of the prison, and the chickens are the prisoners. Mr. Tweedy even has guard dogs that aid in preventing the chickens from escaping, and the movie actually begins rather darkly with a chicken being killed for committing an unforgivable offense, no longer being able to lay eggs. Even the designs of the hen houses are modeled after POW barracks, and Ginger refers to her time in the coal chute as solitary confinement. In fact, the scene of her sitting in there throwing a tennis ball against the wall is probably the closest the movie ever gets to being a direct parody of The Great Escape, as that's modeled exactly after what Steve McQueen's character famously does while he is in solitary confinement. But while the movie does do a great job of setting up the feel of the chickens being the prisoners trying to escape against the evil wardens running the place, what this movie really gets right is that it doesn't try to follow this model too closely, or lay the allegory on too thick. Because Shark Tale almost directly copy and pastes the typical gangster formula, despite the fact that the characters are fish. And this ends up working against the movie, because what the sharks are and what they are a parody of don't line up. This movie, however, smartly treats the situation as presented. In other words, just because the movie is modeled after POW movies doesn't mean the characters are always treated that way. Case in point. While the chickens are treated as prisoners, their role on the farm is made perfectly clear: to make profits for their owners, first with their eggs and then from their meat directly. The reason the chickens want to escape is simply because they want to be free and escape their inevitable fate. Mrs. Tweedy absolutely refuses to believe Mr. Tweedy's suspicions that the chickens are organizing and declares them, quote, the stupidest animals on earth, which goes directly against the suspicious nature of any prison warden. Fowler notes that of course he didn't really fly in the Royal Air Force and was instead just a mascot, as he is only a chicken after all. And finally, the chickens escape by building a plane and flying over the fence, the exact opposite way the prisoners get out in The Great Escape, by digging a tunnel underneath the fence. Now, what's my point here? That unlike Shark Tale, this movie places its story's emphasis on what the chickens actually are rather than what they're meant to be a parody of. In Shark Tale, the sharks are treated as gangsters first and foremost, much to the movie's detriment, while Chicken Run treats the chickens as chickens. You could totally believe that this movie is taking place in the 1950s British countryside with genius-level chickens, because everything fits within the confines of that reality. Yes, the chickens are modeled after POWs, but they're treated by the narrative as chickens first. And similarly, while Mr. and Mrs. Tweedy are meant to represent the wardens, they're really just ordinary farmers who don't have power over anyone but the chickens, and that's how they're treated. That's why, even if it directly goes against what she's supposed to represent, Mrs. Tweedy finds the notion that the chickens are smart and organizing absurd, because that's exactly what any real-life farmer would think. She's not just magically suspicious of them because that's what a prison warden stereotypically is, but instead, like any reasonable human being, dismisses Mr. Tweedy's suspicions as him being a paranoid buffoon. Now sure, there is the little fact that he's right about the whole thing, but again, most people in the real world without inside knowledge of the chicken's intelligence would be quick to side with her over him, if not so harshly. And there's also Mrs. Tweedy's ultimate goal with the chickens to make as big a profit off of them as possible. And that just outright would not exist in POW movies when it comes to the warden, as the only thing even remotely close to that would be trying to climb through the ranks and impress their superiors. But again, because Mrs. Tweedy is ultimately just a greedy chicken farmer, it's pretty logical that she would try to line her pockets any way she could and buys the pie machine to do just that. Again, it may not line up with what she's a parody of, but it does line up with what the character actually is, and Lord and Park wisely chose to take that route with her. As not only does it make sense for the character, but gives us one heck of a memorable villain to boot. Basically, what makes Chicken Run work so well is that it doesn't take the parody aspect too far. It more uses it as a template to tell its own story about chickens trying to escape from their evil owners, and keeps the references to POW movies down to a minimum, using that as more of a visual style than a narrative one. And that's the crucial aspect this movie got right that Shark Tale didn't. Because if this movie had done what Shark Tale did, and played it a lot closer to the types of movies it was parodying, with the chickens really being prisoners of some chicken-human war, then I guarantee you it wouldn't have been nearly as good. To put it simply, when it comes to an animated, kid-friendly parody of a specific genre, they're much better off just using certain aspects of the genre in question as a template to tell their story, like Chicken Run did, over trying to play the parody dead straight even when it doesn't exactly work, like in Shark Tale. And if they really want to play that straight, they should really pick a template that'll suit the genre in question, rather than just to capitalize on a pun. And really, Chicken Run does work much better because it doesn't confine itself to the POW parody. Everything from Rocky's whole dynamic with the chickens, to trying to learn how to fly, to the rats, to everything involving the pie machine, all of that would either be non-existent or totally different if they had taken the parody further than they did. But instead, they chose to tell the story they wanted to tell first and foremost, treating everything exactly the way they're presented all the while, and the result was one of the most critically acclaimed animated movies of the year 2000. Because when you really get down to it, Chicken Run really is a fun, inspirational, and effective kids movie at the end of the day. And while it may have started out as a parody of The Great Escape and POW movies in general, I think we can all be extremely grateful that Peter Lord and Nick Park ultimately decided not to lay on the parody too thick, to the point that it would have negatively affected the already great story that they had in mind. Alright, I think that was everything I wanted to say. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that Chicken Run is such a great movie in part because it doesn't take the parody aspect too far? Or do you believe it's for other reasons that the movie is good? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as always, you don't have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video. You are absolutely free to feel about anything we discuss that you want to. And thank you all for watching. It is all very much appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.